Hey everyone, today I'm going to make a slightly different video than I usually do. A lot of my game dev videos before have talked through my thought process and feelings about my games, but today I'm going to make a video more focused on making a mechanic and coding. And as you've read in the title of the video, I'm going to focus on the swimming mechanic. So I've opened up Super Mario Sunshine here to demonstrate a swimming mechanic that we'll try and replicate a little bit. So let's get off of this tower here, where we're breaking Mario's feet thanks to IK. Now we're in the water. So I'm not going to focus really about following wave movements or buoyancy or anything in this. I'm going to focus strictly on swimming. So right now I'm holding the control stick and I can freely move anywhere I want. It's good to note that Mario moves in relation to the camera view. So they are tied. And you have to also notice that Mario kind of lags a bit in moving. So I'm holding straight right now, and if I go back, he has to do a little turn before he's able to move the direction I'm holding. Furthermore, I can press B to go down and dive deeper, which also gives me a small boost in speed. And if I press A, it'll give me a nice boost of forward momentum and also raise me up. So tapping A is actually the fastest way of moving on the surface of the water. However, I don't have a water surface or anything to replicate that with, so we're going to strictly just make swimming controls without the water. So let's head over to Unity, where we're going to try and replicate at least a little bit of this swimming. So we're in Unity now, and I have this project open with my final product of what I've done recently, making this player controller swimming script. You can notice that I have a camera distance float here, as well as the player camera referenced in the script. And then we also will be needing player input for the new Unity input system, rigid body, or controlling the character within the Unity physics system, move speed variable to control the move speed, vertical move speed for going up and down, rotational speed to control how fast we rotate, and swim boost speed for when you are tapping A to go up. First, I'd like to bring attention to something in the rigid body setup. I have mass as 1, drag as 2, angular drag as 1. The drag and angular drag are a little bit important since we aren't going to be grounded in any way. We don't have any colliders that are contributing friction. So we need to have drag in place of it. Also, make sure to disable gravity because we're not going to be really affected by it during this. We don't have any water system to account for buoyancy or anything, so it's best that we just ignore gravity for now. Also, if you want, you can interpolate the rigid body. That'll make things technically smoother as far as movement goes, especially since the camera is going to be somewhat attached to the player. Though in this example, it is not directly attached, it's just moved by the player movement script. And then if I hit play here, we can see how it's going to work. So here I am. I can freely move the camera with my mouse. I can also do it with a controller. Notably, with the controller it's slower because I don't have any input like sensitivity multiplication on it. Basically, just saying this is just using the raw value that the control stick has instead of making it more sensitive or anything. But moving around with the control stick, I can freely 360 like this, just fine. And it's completely relative to the camera. And while mine is faster, it does take time to rotate like that. If I wanted it to replicate closer, I could attach the rotation directly to player movement, but it gets a little complicated doing that, so I've decided not to go over that in this. So this is the code I have for it. Off with, we have all the variables we want here, including the input, rigid body, the floats to control speed and all that, and the camera. And start, we lock the cursor state and make it invisible, so that way the cursor can be freely used to move without any worries. And then here in update, we get the movement input from the input system as a vector 2. And we also get the camera input below right here as the vector 2. Then we decide to multiply the movement input by the delta time and movement speed to make it independent of frame rate. That is the movement speed itself, independent from frame rate. And then we do rigid body add force transform.forward times movement input.magnitude. This basically is just saying however much we're moving at this moment, go ahead and apply it forward. Since the rotation of the player is managed by the movement as well, we only ever move forward. We don't just dynamically move. It's kind of like a submarine control. We can only move forward and the other directions are controlled by rotation, which is controlled here. So here we do rigid body move rotation. This is probably the most complicated piece of code in this. So we're going to break it down here by pressing enter a few times. So move rotation is basically rotating the rigid body to whatever we put in. So we don't want the rigid body to be directly set to just something weird. So instead of doing that, we decide to do a quaternion lerp. If you don't know what lerp is, it's just linear interpolation. And basically that means instead of just putting in whatever we want, we're going to interpolate between our current rotation, which is transform.rotation here, and a value. And that is this value here, which is a quaternion.euler of some vector stuff. And we'll break this down more. But quaternion.euler is converting the Euler angle to a quaternion, which, if you don't know, a quaternion is a rotational value that is more accurate than a Euler rotation. And Euler rotation is the standard kind of 3-axis rotation that you think of. Quaternion has 4 axes, where that allows it to be more accurate. If I'm honest with you, I don't understand the math perfectly. That's why I mostly do modification and adjustment within Euler and then just convert from Euler to quaternion. But in this case, it's okay since we're doing a lerp in the quaternion. It's not going to really affect too much. So Euler angles are 3 axes, which basically is just vector 3. So in here we put a vector 3. We make a new vector 3. On the x-axis is 0, and on the z-axis it's 0. Because what we really care about is the y-axis. We want to change what direction the player is facing forward, and that basically does it for us. Yeah. So we don't care about any of those. We're just going to go straight into the y-axis here, which is this code here. So player camera.transform.rotation.eulerangles.y. That's just getting the the rotation and Euler angles on the y-axis. So basically, we are only caring about this axis here. Like we are just drawing a circle around the player and trying to face it, essentially, with that code. So like everything top down, rotational wise is on the y here, which is what we care about. And then it's going to be subtracted by a vector 2.signed angle. Now, signed angle here is basically just getting a rotational difference or an angular difference from one angle to another. And as our first input, we have vector 2.up, which is just 0, 1. And then our second is movement input. And movement input is the movement input that we got all the way up here. So on a control stick, if it's pointing straight up, it'll also be 0, 1. Now we subtract this because it's actually inverse the way we'd probably want it. So if it's going left, it's going to be positive, and if it's right, it's negative. So we subtract it so it's the inverse of that, and basically that's it. So now we're subtracting 90 when we hold left and adding when we hold right. So yeah, and that results in us being able to do this right here. Make it rotate wherever the control stick is facing relative to the camera. But that's also why we get the player camera transform instead of the player transform. And then for the rest of the lerp, we're trying to control how much it goes between 2 points. So basically, if you think of it as a line, if this was 0.5 at the end here, we would get at the center of the line. If like going 0 to 1, if we get 0.5 would be the center. If it's 0.25, we'd be going closer to start, etc. It applies just like that, except in rotation. So here I have the rotation speed times movement input.magnitude. It's a cheated way of doing it, but it's a close approximation. If you wanted something more accurate, you'd have to play with a rigid body. It's like rigid body dot get velocity, or something with velocity. Or actually, no, I'm doing it wrong. Rigid body dot angular velocity, or yeah, it would be like linear velocity, I think. Get point relative point velocity. You have to be messing with something like this. Yeah. But yeah, you'd multiply it by that instead. And then this camera setup down here is just a basic orbiting camera. It's very simple. So basically we get the camera input, which is the mouse or the right control stick in the Unity input system. And then we add to the transform position of the camera. Basically, we're gonna break this down a little bit. So we're adding two different things at once here. First is the transform.right, which is basically the direction to the right of the player camera at the moment, times the input.x, which will be positive or negative depending on if the input is right or left. And then we times it by the delta time, so it's independent of frame rate. And then up here, we do the same thing, but up and down with the Y input. So we're adding all these values together, throwing them into here. And we can add these together because right here we are getting vector 3s. And it's multiplied by a float of a vector 2, which is then multiplied by the delta time, which is also a float. And when you multiply vectors by floats, you get a vector that is just multiplied each axis by the float, which is good. But yeah. Then we have down here, player camera.transform.look@transform. This is looking at so in this context, the transform is the attached game object transform of the script, which in this case is the player. So this is basically telling it to look at the player. Nothing too complicated about that. We just let Unity engine do all the math for us. And it's fantastic. And then we have player camera.transform.position. This is going to be the moving the position of the camera. So transform.position minus player camera.transform.forward times camera distance. So basically, we're moving it from the transform.position or the player's position to that of the forward direction, which is why we're subtracting it, because we don't want to move past the player, we want to move away from it, times the camera distance. And if we had a way to change camera distance dynamically before this by, say, using like scroll wheel or something. We could then zoom in and out dynamically thanks to camera distance being a value here. And then the rest of this, we have swim up, which is a function that is called by the input system whenever I hit a button relative that is attached to the swim up. It's just this, and then we just add force up times vertical movement speed plus transform.forward times swim boost speed, which is fairly simple. It's just two different things. Transform.up times vertical movement speed, basically what is going up times that speed. And then for swimming down, we just negate the transform.up times it, so then it goes down. And then transform.forward times swim boost speed is just literally forward momentum with the speed. It's very simple, very effective, and that's basically a rundown of this code. Maybe I should have just coded it myself as more of a tutorial, but I think it's more useful to understand or just have the code read through and try and decide if it's right for your project or not. The biggest thing in coding and stuff is to understand theory. And as long as you understand theory, you can get the execution. Sometimes you just have to find the right functions for it. Sometimes you have to maybe find some math that you have to do. But if you understand the theory, you can trial and error some things and figure it out. But yeah, this is the swim controller. Sadly, I don't have any real oceany assets to make it look more watery as I'm swimming. I just have this animation that I got from Mixamo and this model from Mixamo just as a test to show what it can look like. Anyways, in the future, I think I'm going to go more in depth on various mechanics. I'm already working on a first-person controller, which will have more complicated features in the gun system and stuff on it, and some more interesting stuff on it. I might try to go along on that one, but right now I have a hurricane coming at me. Very beautiful hurricane named Helen, but I do have it coming towards me, and so I'm going to be swimming with the fish soon. And so I wish all of you luck, because I am prepared now to control my way through anything. And so with that said, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please comment, rate, subscribe. I do appreciate it. Hit the thumbs up icon if you liked it. Give me a like. Blah, 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 blah. Peace.